West Virginia mountain melody. There's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free. Your West Virginia mountain melodies.
Welcome to another edition of Around and About the Clarksburg History Museum, and today our special guest is Bobby Bice. Bobby, welcome to the museum today.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
We've been talking a little bit beforehand about your family, and for those that don't know, you have the Bice's greenhouse.
My parents do, yes. My family does, yes.
And it's celebrating in 2025, it's celebrating its 100th year anniversary. So I kind of want to touch on that. Tell a little bit about where it is and a little bit of the history of it.
Sure thing. The greenhouse business is an enterprise, which enterprise, for people that may not know, enterprise is just north of Shinnston along Route 19. We're right in the turn there in Enterprise. My great-grandfather started it. Actually started growing plants prior to 1910. He grew them out of cold frames. I don't know if you know what a cold frame is or not, but just basically a raised bed that sits in the ground. It sits up a little bit at an angle, and you put glass sheets over it to kind of develop a mini type of greenhouse right in the ground. But he started on that prior to 1910, but he didn't build his actual, what we consider a greenhouse today. He didn't build one of those until 1925. So we always credit the business as starting in 1925, even though he actually, you could go for the growing plants and selling them prior to that. But so 1925, so then my great-grandparents ran it until 1954, and then my grandparents took it over in 1954, and they ran it until my grandfather died in 1983. And then my dad and mother, they'd already been helping out with the business and jointly running it with my grandparents for a few years, but then they officially took it over in the 80s, and they've had it ever since. My parents have had it the longest out of all three generations that have ran it. My parents have had it the longest.
What a testament, though, to keep it in the family 100 years.
Yeah, and Harrison County, too. I mean, I don't think there's that many greenhouses in general that have lasted that long. Harrison County's had a ton of greenhouses over the years. I mean, just in Enterprise alone, we had 3 at one time back in the day, and then just right up the road was another one. So just in that small area, we had 4 different family greenhouse businesses. But in Harrison County alone, I don't know the amount that there have been, but ours has definitely been the longest. And on top of being the longest lasting, it's also been, people come in and they'll put a plastic hoop house up, and then they bring plants in from Pittsburgh, set them in there, sell them, bring another truck in from Pittsburgh, set them in there and sell them. We grow. That's a huge difference.
And I don't know about you, but when I buy a plant at one of these big places locally that's like a Lowe's or a Home Depot, those plants don't seem to survive as well as something that's homegrown here locally.
Right, and I'd agree with that, because a lot of those come from Canada, and they're on trucks, and they get shipped here, and then they get put out, and then you got a person that, they're coming to work part-time at Lowe's for whatever, and they're just, oh yeah, I guess we need to water that. I'll get to it here in a little bit. We're busy right now, and then it'll look half dead, and then they'll throw some water on it and overwater it, and then it still looks half dead, but then people end up buying it. But that's our product, that's our name, we're growing it from the beginning, so we want to see it leave as we're taking care of it, and hopefully that it'll continue to be taken care of once it goes to somebody's home. But
do you grow the heirloom like mortgage lifter tomatoes and all
we
of
do.
that?
There are hundreds of different varieties of tomatoes and peppers both when you go down the list of different seed companies that have them, but we do grow mortgage lifter. There's actually, mortgage lifter is a West Virginia tomato.
Yes.
There are 3 or 4 that we sell that are West Virginia tomatoes, and I believe the story behind mortgage lifter, the guy that developed that tomato, he took the money that he made off of the first few rounds of trying to sell the tomato and paid off his mortgage. So that's why he named it mortgage lifter. But we have a Bice's beefsteak that my great-grandfather started back in the 30s, and it's obviously a West Virginia tomato. We're West Virginians, but we sell it every year, and it's a pink beefsteak. A lot of people don't like pink tomatoes. They'd rather have a red one for the acid in them.
I was going to say, is that lower acid?
Yeah, a pink one is lower acid, yes.
Well,
so the lighter the color tomato, then the less acid it is. But we have a pink beefsteak, and it sells fairly well. I'm not a tomato eater myself, but it's a pretty large, beefsteaks are meaty, and they're more large generally and heavy, so it's a nice sized tomato.
What's the hours of the greenhouse if I want to go and buy that?
It will open the week, probably the Saturday after Easter is generally, or this year anyway, generally the last Saturday of April is when we open, but it'll be 9 to 6 until Memorial Day. Memorial Day hours will change after that.
I've enjoyed following your Facebook page, and
Thank you.
You're giving a little bit of history about the greenhouses. And I also found that interesting about the glass, how it used to be the glass greenhouses,
Right,
and now
right.
it's all the plastic high tunnel.
Yeah, we still have one glass house on site. When I was a kid, we had 7 glass houses and 1 plastic, but the hoop house type thing. But now we have 2 plastic, and then we still have 1 peak glass house. And of course, you know, the glass houses require more care and more upkeep and more repairs, but they're still it's neat to have.
Yeah,
there.
they're kind of being lost like the barns are.
Right,
you know,
right.
you don't see as many of those anymore.
Right. We have a story we're going to do here in a couple weeks, or maybe a month or so. I don't know. But when the tornado hit Shinnston, and we live in Enterprise, so it's outside of Shinnston, so we didn't have to deal with it. But the surrounding areas outside of Shinnston got horrible hailstorms. So my great-grandparents at the time, of course it was during the war, so less people available to help repair things because a lot of the men were fighting overseas. But my great-grandparents they had 300 sections of glass busted because of the hail pounding. It was, and of course before all of our time, but they said that the hail balls were just humongous coming down and just pounding through that glass. And it happened at 8:30 in the evening, so nobody was in the greenhouses when it happened. But, you know, horrible times for a lot of people. Of course, that's not death or destruction where people lost their homes or anything like that in Shinnston with a tornado, but we had a lot of unknown damage in Shinnston Enterprise that happened with the greenhouses.
Wow,
so,
that's interesting.
yeah.
If they want to do your Facebook page, what's the name of your Facebook? If they
Bice's Greenhouse.
Bice's Greenhouse, okay. Spell that, because there's different ways of doing it.
Yeah, there's different ways of spelling Bice's. We are with a C, so B as in boy, ICES. So.
Well, I'm going to make a trip down there.
Our last name is Bice, but Bice's, so it's apostrophe S. So.
Well, I also, really the focus today, we're going to talk about trees.
Yes.
And when I think about trees, I think there's some famous trees in the area. Pringle Tree up in Upshur County. Right next door to us at the History Museum here on Main Street in Clarksburg, we have a survivor tree from the World Trade Center. I don't know if many people know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's
and
a
the Nathan Golf lot?
Yes, there's a survivor tree from the World Trade Center over there.
Now, how was that acquired? Do you know the story behind that?
I don't know the story on that.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I'm a tree lover. I mean, I used to hunt mushrooms, and I had my favorite oak trees. And I actually cried, Bobby, when one of my oak trees fell over in a windstorm. So trees mean a lot to me.
Well, if you're going to lose a tree to a storm, I personally would rather it be a pine tree or something like that, which pine tree, how a tree's roots grow, pine trees go more horizontal than they do vertical. A lot like an oak tree, their roots will go straight down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're harder to lose in a storm, I would think. But a pine tree, you know, they topple over all the time. So I'm with you. I take it to heart more whenever you lose a tree like that.
So I can just about imagine, we're going to talk about the Big Elm tree. I can just about imagine what that meant to the people in that community.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
So tell the story, the history of the Big Elm, what it is, where it was.
So Big Elm is actually the name of the community now, but for people that may not know where Big Elm is, when you're leaving Shinnston traveling on Route 19 and you're heading north, once you leave Shinnston, you cross the bridge and you stay on 19 and you eventually pass the community Big Elm. The only thing that's there now basically is a grade school. Big Elm Elementary School sits there, and it sits just right up off of Teatrick Road there on the straight stretch at Big Elm. However, Big Elm itself, the community itself, there was a lot of things that were on that, what's termed the Big Elm Farm back in the day. In more recent year, I said recent years, but not really recent, but in the 20th century, the Hood family was the family that was more known to have lived on Big Elm, but there have been different families over the years. But you know, there was a cheese factory there, they had a farm there, dairy farm. I mean, the Hood family, there was a lot of people may remember there being a park at Big Elm. There was a roadside park, the Elm Roadside Park, that sat there. In the early 50s, there was actually, the Hood family had put a little tiny roller coaster there. Didn't really go very far. It was just basically did a loop and came back. But a lot of kids from the 40s and early 50s can remember riding that little hoop roller coaster there. So it's just neat to have stuff like that in that little community that you drive through there now, and people are like, Big Elm, there's a school there. And then I've told people before about, it's called Big Elm because of the tree. And I was talking to I was in the log house in Shinnston several years ago, and a woman and her grandson walked in, and I had mentioned the Big Elm, and she said, she looked at her grandson who went to Big Elm Elementary School, and she said, yeah, that's named for the trees out in front of your school. And I told her, I'm like, no. She said, oh yeah, there's some elm trees right in front of the school. I said, well, there is. And I believe my dad actually planted 2 elm trees in front of the school right after it was built. They had my dad plant the elm trees there. But whenever I let her finish because I didn't really want to correct her when she was trying to tell her grandson something. So whenever they weren't paying as much attention later, I kind of told her, I'm like, so Big Elm, let me tell you the story behind that. And then I went into the story behind it. So the Big Elm community, though, is actually named for the Big Elm tree. And elm trees in general will grow quicker and larger than a lot of other trees. And typically a water elm tree just meaning that it sits close to a body of water somewhere. So the West Fork River runs parallel right through the Big Elm community with Route 19. And the elm tree sat the elm tree sat at if you're driving on Route 19 out of Shinnston heading toward Enterprise, then the elm tree actually sat on what Route 19 is now at the end of that straight stretch. And when we can go into that later as far as whenever it was torn down, whenever it was taken out and stuff. But if you Google the Big Elm, you'll have all kind of big elm trees because there are a lot of trees in the United States named Big Elm. I think there's one in Massachusetts. Pennsylvania used to have one. There's just a lot of, and there's dozens, but there's a lot of places called the Big Elm tree, or a lot of trees called the Big Elm tree. And again, big elms grow larger than a typical tree does, and like I said, quicker.
But this was like the virgin elm that had never been ever cut.
Right, and I can't imagine when that land was first settled. It was in the 1700s, 1773, 1775. So it was 1770s when that land was first settled by a man named Samuel Merrifield. And I can't imagine whenever you're traveling through, whether it be horse and buggy or horseback or whatever it was at the time, coming through and rounding that turn and seeing that massive tree, it'd be like, geez, a whiz.
It looks, and we'll have pictures on the post of this, but to me it reminds me of like a redwood tree. I mean, it's huge.
And some of those redwoods out in California and stuff, they've cut a section out of the bottom of it so cars can drive through the tree literally, and you still have enough of the tree left. So I mean, to be able to be in the foresty, if you will use that term, foresty area of Virginia at the time, and the mountain regions of the state, and just come through and round that bend and see that massive tree. I can't imagine the feeling that Samuel Merrifield at the time would have felt, being like, my goodness, I'm claiming my stake here, or staking my claim here rather.
Can you imagine though, Bobby, like coming in here where it had never been timbered out before and seeing those big chestnut trees, and that's amazing.
I can't imagine.
Do you think there were other elm trees around in that area there that as big as that?
Oh, I'm sure there were many large ones, but probably not that large, no. And for historical purposes, I've been told, and I believe it's recorded somewhere, that tree was 600 years old whenever they cut it down. So, and I doubt that there was anybody that sat and, here, I'll count this set of rings, you count that one. I doubt anybody actually counted the rings, so I don't know how they came up with that number 600, but I take it to be true.
Do you know the size, like the circumference?
Yeah, the circumference at its base was over 30 feet in circumference. The measurement that was actually taken, that's recorded, the recorded measurement, because the tree was actually in 1876, of course our country was founded in 1776, so in 1876 Philadelphia had this big centennial exposition that year to celebrate 100 years of the country, where we're doing our centennial anniversary for the country. So in Philadelphia that year, they were taking information from different contests, to have different contests throughout the award prizes, basically, if you will, to different things throughout the United States for different purposes, whether it be a business or a thing, something that declared, that brought notoriety to a certain part of the country. So they had a tree contest. So the Hood family submitted information about the Big Elm tree. The Big Elm tree, which is the Hood family, when I mentioned earlier about Samuel Merrifield settling the land, so Samuel Merrifield, it eventually passed to the Everson family, and then the Everson family sold it to the Hood family. So in 1876, for the 100-year anniversary of the country, the Hood family were the owners at that time. So the Hood family took information about the tree and submitted it to Philadelphia and to the committee and being like, hey, this is what we've got, put us down for an entry into the largest tree. So the blue ribbon that was awarded was titled the largest tree of its kind in the United States, and it went to the Big Elm tree. So the Hood family got that award. Now, that title, largest tree of its kind, I've never, because like I said before, elm trees grow large, so I don't know if it means the largest water elm tree or the largest tree in general, or what they meant for that category in the Centennial Exposition in 1876. And I've tried looking up information from that exposition, trying to find what all contests did you have, what all prizes were awarded, and I could never find anything detailed enough to get to that point to list the tree on there, but I haven't made the attempt. I've just not found anything yet.
Was that always like a tourist attraction in that area for people to come and see?
It was not, and I just realized I didn't fully answer your question before, but when I went into the circumference and I started talking about the Centennial Exposition, so the measurement that was sent to Philadelphia was measured 3 feet above the ground. Because, as a tree grows into the ground, the root system starts belling out at the bottom toward the ground. So they did it from the actual circumference where it was just parallel tree, straight up and down part of the tree, 3 feet above the ground. And at that circumference, they measured 27 feet. So, you figure as it bells out and it goes closer to the ground, it's well over 30 at the ground. And you can tell that in pictures that you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, the people standing look like a little speck right next to them. It's amazing.
Yeah. And what was your question?
Was it a tourist attraction for people?
It was not a tourist attraction because the way to get from just picking 2 points, we'll pick the 2 county seats. If you were going from Clarksburg to Fairmont along Route 19, which is the north-south route that goes, New York to Florida, basically. But if you were traveling Route 19 from Clarksburg to Fairmont going north, today, that would not have been the route then. Because when you got into Shinnston, right now there's a stoplight in Shinnston where the bank is and the museum is at the corner there. At that stoplight, you would have turned right and went up to what we locally have termed East Shinnston. But you would have traveled through East Shinnston and went out what is called Bethlehem Road that goes on the east side of the West Fork River, and you would have went down on that side, stayed on that side of the river through Enterprise, and then crossed over the river again at Worthington, and then got back onto that side of the river. Reason being, from that stoplight that I mentioned in Shinnston north, on that side of the river in Shinnston, what is still downtown today, that was all private farmland. That was a man named David Mahlon Shinn had that as his farmland. So there was no road that continued that direction. And the bridge was built eventually in Shinnston in the 1870s, 1876, I believe. But it was a bridge street, the bridge that people know in the last nearly 100 years in Shinnston. That bridge that's further north, that bridge is the main thoroughfare, if you will, for traveling north to get on the opposite side of the river. But the Big Elm, it's just like that David Mahlon Shinn farm that I mentioned was privately owned land. The Big Elm farm, and I'm terming it the Big Elm farm because that's what they referred to it as because of the fame that the tree eventually brought through the book. That farmland was also privately owned. So there was no road through it. There was no, what we know today is the Big Elm Straight Stretch or where the school is or anything like that. Like that was all farmland through there. You could not travel through there. If you were on that property, they wanted you off that property. If you didn't have a reason to be there, then get off that property. So there was no roadway north-south, south-north, whatever, through the Big Elm area. So people couldn't see the tree. So
really bringing roads to the tree were its demise, really, wasn't it? Eventually.
It eventually was, yes. And that's not, the roadway wasn't what killed the tree, but it was the reason it got taken out to make room for that road coming through.
Yeah. Didn't the streetcar run through there too, I think?
The streetcar did. The streetcar and the pictures of the tree. I mean, I brought one here to show you, and there's one on the back of when they were tearing it down. But that's a grown man. That's Charles Hood, that was part owner of the Big Elm farm. His father, William Hood, is the one that purchased the farm in 1868 off of the Everson family.
What a beautiful tree.
But that man is a fully grown man standing under the tree, and you can see there's easily he's maybe a 5-6 foot tall man, but there's easily 8 or 10 foot above him before you even get to the first branch of the tree. So.
That's beautiful. Can we put that on our post for this?
Sure, yeah.
We'll make a copy of that.
Sure.
So then the back of it is when the tree is being destroyed.
Yes, and you can see the photographer, how they wrote that on it's actually a glass negative. They took a glass negative and etched out, what does it say, the old historic elm?
The old historic elm, near Shinnston.
And it was historic because a lot of what made it historic was Daughter of the Elm book. That's kind of what made it more curiosity. I guess that's a good word. It made it a curiosity for people to, let's go find this tree type thing. And that helped people to bring the area, not necessarily fame, that's probably not the right word to use, but it brought more people and interested persons in to see it.
Well, let's talk about the book.
Sure.
How that came about.
Sure.
Now, I found, and I'm going to give this to you, you probably already have it, but 1900 Clarksburg Telegram.
Oh, advertising for the book sale?
Just published, Daughter of the Elm, A Tale of the Virginia Border Before the War by Granville Davidson Hall.
Yes.
So let's talk about that.
Sure. So Granville Davidson Hall, I believe he was born in Salem, and he lived in Salem till, I off the top of my head, I think he was about 7 years old or something like that when the family moved to Shinnston. His father, and I know Granville Davidson Hall died in 1934, he was 96, so, that would put him well of age during the Civil War. But his father opened up a shop, a little store in Shinnston at the corner of Walnut and what we know as Pike Street. So Walnut and Pike Street right there. And Walnut was actually, at the time, Walnut was named Ferry Street, Ferry, because there was at the base of that street, a ferry ran across the river. There was no bridges at that time period, so a ferry ran across the river there. But at the corner there, his father came to Shinnston and opened up a shop right there. In the back of that shop, as Granville and his brother Van got older, Van was V-A-N was his brother's name. As Granville and his brother Van got older, they opened up a little apothecary shop in the back of their father's store. So he got to know, Granville being part operator in that little shop there, he got to know a lot of people coming in and out of town, and his father having that store, they just knew everybody. So Granville, from the time he was a little kid, became known everywhere because he eventually, in Shinnston area, he eventually taught school for just a few years. And Granville himself went into like a little political life because he was Secretary of the State of West Virginia I want to say he might have been the first Secretary of State, but he was Secretary of the State a few different times. And he was secretary to Arthur Borman, and Arthur Borman was, West Virginia's first actual governor. Francis Pierpont, a lot of people seem to think Francis Pierpont was West Virginia's first governor. He was not. Arthur Borman was. But Granville Davidson Hall had a political career getting started, and from that political career getting started, I'm backtracking for a reason. Because of that political career getting started, he got a lot of information on how the state was formed, how the state of West Virginia was formed. So his initial interest was in the forming of the state and that time period of West Virginia's history. And Granville Davidson Hall actually wrote at least 5. I'm told he wrote 7 books. I've never found proof of 7 books. He wrote at least 5, and I have all 5 of the ones that I know that he wrote. And Daughter of the Elm, The Rending of Virginia. And for a long time, I was like, rending, should that be rendering of Virginia? Like, it's the rending of Virginia. So the term rending means you're tearing apart into 2 pieces. So you're tearing Virginia apart into 2 pieces. So The Rending of Virginia is a book. Old Gold, and Old Gold is actually another local book. Old Gold is based off of people in Shinnston, true characters in Shinnston that he kind of changed their names in the book and gave them different names. Lee's Invasion of Northwest Virginia is another book of his, and he had another book, and I forget the name of it off the top of my head.
He loved history, though.
Yes, absolutely, yes. Or was that all of them? Oh, The Two Virginias. There was one called The Two Virginias. That might have been his last work. So Daughter of the Elm and Daughter of the Elm and Old Gold are the only books of his that don't deal with the formation of the state, but they're from that time period. So Daughter of the Elm wasn't written until 1899, but in 1899 he was writing a story based off of the Civil War because his interests were, again, during that time period that the state was formed. His interests were the formation of the state. Those 3 books, Lee's Invasion of Northwest Virginia, that was in 1861. The 2 Virginias, talking about West Virginia and the state of Virginia, and then the rending of Virginia, dividing Virginia up. Like his 3 historically accurate books were based off of his notes from not only being Secretary of State and Secretary to Arthur Borman, but like his research notes that he took and collected and kept from the formation of the state. So,
and he would have had those stories firsthand.
Absolutely, so that that they were accurate.
Yeah.
So, and in my mind, that's another reason why I say, and we're starting to get into the book here, the Daughter of the Elm book. A lot of people back in the day would argue, like get into severe arguments, whether or not Daughter of the Elm was a true book, whether it's fact or fiction, basically. So I think that it was a true book. I think that it should be classified as nonfiction myself because every other writing that he did was true to form. And the Daughter of the Elm book starts out saying, I believe it's like either 37 or 38 years prior, an old man came to me telling this story. That's how he starts out the book Daughter of the Elm. So he's setting the scene for you in 1899. He's saying that this was almost 40 years prior. So that puts us at 1860, so 1861. So that's how he's starting the story at that time frame that every other book that he wrote was starting. So it's interesting to compare all of his works in that respect to me, because your whole writing career is focused on the years of the Civil War. So I think that's pretty cool. But
was that his most popular book, Daughter of the Elm?
It definitely was, without a doubt. Yeah, and I believe that I've read a newspaper article where he wasn't necessarily interviewed, but it mentioned that he had said, and even in his obituary, I believe, I've read his obituary multiple times, his obituary states that famed author dies, of Glencoe. He was living in Glencoe, Illinois at the time. He was 96 years old. But it states that, Daughter of the Elm was by far his most published work and his most popular. So, and it became popular for a multitude of reasons. One, because locally speaking, he was the book Without Doubt. I don't know if it says in this article or not, but Book Without Doubt was very popular locally because whenever he wrote that book, every character in the book is a real life character. Like as an example, one of the characters in the book was named Ray Harris. Well, that guy's name in real life was Harris Ney. And another character in the book was Jacob, I believe it's Fontrey, Fontrey. But in real life, his name was Jacob Fortney.
So the locals would have recognized these,
right,
people
exactly. And Joe, there's a character, Joe Diedrich, with a D as in dog, Diedrich, but the character in real life was Joe Tetrick, with a T.
Oh, so, that's a popular name in that area.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and actually, that's one of my ancestors. But I mean, there are so many different similar ways that he just, like, even towns. Like he mentioned Worthlesston in the book, but it's Worthington in real life. So he described things so cleverly. Like his mind was, he must have been a very witty man, but he was an intelligent man because he could think of the detail to such a fine point.
And it's a beautifully written book. I mean,
it really is.
I mean, the way he paints a picture in your mind, you can really see.
Right. When the very first chapter of the book, he's bringing up that very first chapter of the book, talking about this Lorraine Esmond, which her name in real life was Susanna Everson, but this Lorraine Esmond sitting beneath the tree, talking about the Big Elm tree, sitting beneath the tree on a bench, and he goes into detail about the way that the bench was built, like how
he's probably sat under that tree many times and visualized all of that.
So I mean, the detail that he goes into every single thing, it's just it's amazing at that. You think of a writer in today's world, and they could think of things, but they're going to Google things and have some kind of AI technology, which I hate.
I hate it.
AI technology that's going to give them a story for them, and they're going to put their name on it and say that they did it, but in reality they didn't. Like Granville Davidson Hall was his works. It was his own work.
His feelings
Right,
and thoughts.
right. So, while it's on my mind, that woman, the main character of the book, or one of the main characters of the book actually has several main characters, but one of the main characters of the book sitting beneath that tree waiting on her lover to cross the West Fork River because he was going to come and see her that evening. Well, it describes her lover, and his name in the book was George Helms or Holmes, I forget. I think it's George Holmes, but in real life, his name was George Helms, and it says in the book that his father was a wagon maker in town. Well, George Helms' father really was a wagon maker in town. So like, for people to say that the book is absolutely not true, I would highly argue that point, if nothing more than for the detail that he puts into the book for each of his characters and what they really were in real life. Like that in itself is saying, well, I'm going to make up this story, but I'm going to tell you that this person here, his father did this, and they did this, and they lived in this house, and everything. All of that stuff's going to be true, but I'm going to make up what they did. Like, I don't buy that.
Yeah.
But and regardless, the book just celebrated 125 years old in December. This ad that you have here, just where it says just published, that was published, and the book was first published in December 1899. So December 2024, the book's been out for 125 years old.
And you can still get copies of that book.
Yeah. And there have been many printings over the years. I want to say at least 7 that I know of. I'm sure more than that. I think the last one was done in 2016, maybe, something like that. But, I mean, there have been, the book's been published so many times. The first edition was always the most interesting to me because the first edition didn't have photos in it. So that first edition, and actually, I have a first edition signed by Granville Davidson Hall. I had no idea Granville Davidson Hall signed any of his books, and I found that one, and a guy was selling it, and I thought, well, I've never seen that, and I don't know that I'll ever see that again, so I'll buy it off of him. So I bought it off of him, and then just a few years after that, I found Old Gold, and it was signed by Granville Davidson Hall, and I thought, well, this is cool. I didn't know Granville Davidson Hall ever signed these books, so...
Those were waiting for you,
Right, yeah, that's kind of how I took it. So then I found another one, and it's either Rending of Virginia or Lee's Invasion of Northwest Virginia. One of those two I also have that's signed by him. So it was just 3 of the 5 books that I know that he published, or he had written, then I have them signed by him. So that's really pretty cool. But that first edition, Daughter of the Elm, it came out, it told this story of so many different local characters, if you local in quotation marks there, if you will, because there were characters out of Worthington, Shinnston, and Clarksburg. Clarksburg has and actually, when I said earlier about Worthlesston and Worthington, and actually he named Shinnston Riverside. Shinnston was named Riverside in the book, but Clarksburg got Clarksburg.
Really?
He left Clarksburg as Clarksburg in the book.
I wonder why he did that.
I don't know. And there's a couple other characters in the book that he left their real name in there. I believe a man named Peter B. Ryder. P.B. Ryder was left Ryder in the book. So I believe he was. I'm 99% sure that he was anyway. So I don't know why he chose to disguise some, but
good advertising, though.
Absolutely.
If you have Clarksburg in there.
and whenever you are reading the book, you can associate your connections with people. So in 1899, when this book's coming out, and they're saying, "Hey, I'm mentioned in that book," well, that's going to sell more books. Obviously, It's not just. You're not selling a book that's describing the formation of West Virginia. You're describing a book that's getting personal with people now, and they want the attention, just like in today's world. Everybody wants that selfie time. They want that attention. But
well, I'm sure too, when this came out, all the young ladies reading this book, I want to go see where that elm tree is, and I'm sure that was a big thing to go see.
And exactly what you just said was the reason why the first edition is the only edition without photos. Once the book came out and people were like, I wonder what this tree looked like. Or one of the places mentioned in the book where a man comes to the area and he stays in Clarksburg at the Walker House.
Oh, well, that's true too. That's a true place.
Exactly. So they put a picture of the Walker House in the book in later editions. So, and the old stone house in Shinnston, the old log house at Big Elm. I mean, there's I don't know, maybe without counting them, maybe 8 or 10 different pictures throughout the book in later editions. But that first edition had no pictures. Then once the book came out and people are buying it and they're getting more curious in their minds, they're like, I wonder where that is, or I wonder what that looked like. Then a photographer in town, Muta Swiger, he owned a photography shop and a jewelry shop, and he actually owned a jewelry shop in Shinnston for 60 years, or maybe not quite that long, but pretty close to it. Because at that time period, a jeweler had all the little tiny tools to be able to work on rings and necklaces and all that stuff. So a jeweler would typically be your photographer, because a photographer also needed little tiny tools to work on cameras.
Oh, okay.
So Muta Swiger kind of crossed over and got into that photography business with his jewelry shop, and he took the interest. He was like, when Granville Davidson Hall had announced that he was going to, and again, Granville Davidson Hall knew a lot of people in town, so he knew Muta Swiger. So whenever he announced he was going to do a second edition, because the first edition, he exhausted all copies, they were all sold. In 1907, he was going to print a second edition. Muta Swiger approached him. He's like, we got a lot of people wanting to know where this stuff is. I could take photos if you'll publish them in the book with your next works. So that's what he did. So then, kind
of a good thing, because then we have a record of these places.
Exactly. It shows, and just like in today's world, I wrote a book, and my book is a pictorial. A pictorial. People are more interested in something if they can thumb through it and look at pictures. If they have to stop and focus their mind on words and try to understand what they're reading, they're less likely to read it. So if you see a picture, you're going to associate your mind's thoughts to, ooh, well, let me read about this real quick in this chapter. And then you turn the page a few pages and you got another picture. It's like, oh, that's interesting. And you keep on reading it. So you mean you're keeping the curiosity of the people to be able to sell more copies of the book.
So they realized that back in 1907.
Absolutely.
That's pretty smart.
Yeah. And, the book itself is a Titanic. And I say Titanic because it's like a James Cameron Titanic. Like, it's a tragedy in a lot of ways that they're making a love story out of. Because the book itself, as he starts out, he's talking about, this young lady sitting beneath this tree on a bench and waiting her lover to come across. But most of the book is dealing with an outlaw band, a local outlaw band that they met at what is termed the Big Elm farm, the farmhouse there, the old log farmhouse that sat on that farm that it burned down, I believe, in November of '91. It was still standing until then. But this outlaw band, this group of outlaws in the local area would meet at this log home and discuss ways to, who are they going to steal from tonight, that type of thing.
Was that based on true people, you think?
The characters in the book are true people in life, and that was one that I mentioned earlier about Ray Harris was Harris Ney. There's a character named Lot Dyson. There's two Everson brothers, the two Everson brothers were brothers to the young lady sitting beneath the tree. It was her family's farm. So they were meeting at her family's farm. Two of her brothers were part of the outlaw gang. And then there's another character, I can't remember his name, that also met. He was part of the gang too. But those people were absolutely real life people, and that's where a lot of I think that's where a lot of the that's not true comes in, because just as you have descendants of the Queen of England, you're going to have descendants of some a mobster out of New York City.
Bob, holding through those old newspapers, I love to do that. I was surprised at the amount of crime back then.
Yeah.
And there actually were roving guerrilla bands of people that would rob and steal and kill. And I mean, I'm thinking of the good old days, nothing like that ever happened, but it was very prominent.
Oh, it definitely did. It definitely did. And actually, I was reading a journal from, and actually the photographer that I was talking about that took the photos for the book, he kept journals in the early part of the 1900s, and I was reading one of his from 1908, I believe it was. And in 1908, just his entry for that day was he mentioned the guy's name, and it said he was arrested today for raping his 8-year-old daughter.
That happened.
And you're like, you don't think of stuff like that happening 120 years ago, but it did.
It did.
It absolutely did.
Really, in many ways, I think I don't know that I would have wanted to live back then, because it seemed like crime was so bad.
And the police presence, if you will. The police presence back then was probably just one justice of the peace or town chief of police, whatever you want to had framed, whatever the law was. Whoever was head of the law at that time was responsible for farmland people. And I say farmland people meaning you got this man over here. Well, he owns 160 acres right here. And then, you travel down the road a good ways, and then his farmhouse is going to sit way back up on that hill, but he owns all of this land right here. Well, you didn't have house after house after house after house.
No.
And as more chaotic as that might be to have house after house after house, it's easier to keep track of who's doing what rather than being... You got this farm guy here and then this farm guy way out here, because you don't know what they're doing on their lands. You can't access them, so it's more difficult to access.
So when he wrote about these roving robbers, I guess this was something that actually occurred.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And one of the stories in the book talks about the man that I said, Joe Diedrich, which was really Joe Tetrick in the book. So he lived. And for people that are familiar with the area, it would make more sense. But if you're on the Big Elm straight stretch, where the Big Elm grade school sits up the road, Big Elm Elementary School sits up the road there, right past the turnoff to Tetrick Road starts where the houses were on the Big Elm farm. The land is still vacant right there. And you can kind of, the lay of the land, you can kind of see where the driveway was and where the old brick driveway, you can kind of see how things were laid out there when you compare old pictures to it. But up Tetrick Road, what's called Tetrick Road, named after Joe Tetrick's ancestor, the family there, right up Tetrick Road where Joe Tetrick lived. See, he was considered a neighbor to that family, the Everson family, which the Everson family is the characters in the book. Esmond in the book, but Everson in real life. So Joe Tetrick was buying property at Laurel Run in Enterprise, which Laurel Run is on the east side of the river over by the cemetery in Enterprise. Joe Tetrick was buying property, farmland, off of a man named Peter B. Ryder. So he needed a $3,500 down payment, and he needed to go to the bank in Clarksburg to get the money because there were no banks in Shinnston at the time. So he had to go to Clarksburg to get the money. Well, the Everson family found out about this. I say Everson family, but it's Esmond in the book. The story's coming from the book. The Esmond family found out about this. So the main Harry Esmond, that is the, again, character in the book, Harry Esmond, the main leader of the outlaw band, if you will, terming him the leader, he told the group, he's like, I don't want trouble with old Joe. Joe's always been a good neighbor. He's good to us. We're good to him. I don't want trouble. Let's not rob him. Let's leave him alone. So that he thought that was it. He said, I've told you guys, I'm the leader. I told you guys not to do it. We're not doing it. Well, two of the guys thought, screw that. We're going to do it our way. We are going to rob him. He goes to Clarksburg. He's getting the $3,500. He's got to bring it back. He's not going to go to Clarksburg and come right back. He would always, Joe Tetrick, whenever he would take a trip to Clarksburg, would be an all-day trip. He would go to Clarksburg, spend time, do whatever, and come back at night. Well, coming back at night, how the road was at that time period, we didn't have bridges like we do today. We had covered bridges. So in what's the area basically termed Gypsy now, but Malsby, Gypsy, that area had the Malsby Bridge. And the Malsby Bridge, the center pier to it is actually, the stone pier is actually still standing, and you can see it in the river when you're crossing the Gypsy Bridge. But the Malsby covered bridge was the county's longest covered bridge at the time. So, of course, what's a covered bridge have at nighttime? It's already dark outside, then you go into this covered bridge, it's going to be even darker, right? So they thought, well, we'll wait in that covered bridge, the Malsby covered bridge, for him to come home, and whenever he comes home, we'll just rob him. We'll take what we want. And the one guy in the it's kind of funny because they quote him in the book, he's like, carrying money around in a handkerchief like it was tea or coffee just to fool honest people or lead them into temptation is wrong, unchristian, and a violation of the Lord's Prayer. So, he's basically saying, we want what you've got and you're hiding it from us, and that's wrong.
He's trying to justify that.
Yeah, right. And using the Lord to do it, right? So they wait in the bridge for him, and whenever he comes through, of course, he's had a little bit of whiskey, and Joe Tetrick's had a little bit of whiskey in him that day. So whenever he comes through, they have him get off of his horse. He's riding horseback. They have him get off of his horse and rob him in the Malsby Covered Bridge there, and they can't find the money. They're like, well, where's the money you got today in Clarksburg? He's like, well, what money? He said, that $3,500 you're paying Peter B. Ryder for that land. He's like, what? I met Peter B. Ryder in Clarksburg today. When I was in Clarksburg, he was there, so I went ahead and paid him. Well, then they were stuck because they're like, we wanted your money, dang it. So whatever he had on him, it was like a plug of tobacco and a knife and a bottle of whiskey and $4. They gave everything back to him except the whiskey. The boys kept the whiskey. I said, well, you can have everything else, we're going to keep the whiskey. So then Joe Tetrick, I think that might have been like maybe chapter 4 in the book. But when Joe Tetrick's coming back, I say Joe Tetrick, it's Joe Diedrich in the book. But whenever he's coming back to Shinnston, he stops at what is termed the Blue Boar Tavern in the book. And just to backtrack real quick, the Blue Boar Tavern in real life was named the Red Lion Tavern. So the Red Lion had and this is true, the Red Lion in real life, it was named the Red Lion, had a sign out front with a painting of a red lion on it. And they called it the Red Lion Tavern, and a man named William Lyon owned it, Lyon.
Oh, okay.
William Lyon owned that place in real life. So when he's coming back through, he stops at the Blue Boar Tavern. And the writer, Granville Davidson Hall, goes into detail about that sign. He's like, that sign out front had a painting of a black boar, like a wild hog or a wild pig. So had a painting of a black boar on that sign out front, that over time that black paint had faded it and made it look blue. So they called the place Blue Boar Tavern, ran by a man named Jonas Blue. So the detail that Granville Davidson Hall goes into all this is just like, he's taking William Lyon had Red Lion Tavern, I'm going to say Jonas Blue has Blue Boar Inn. And
to think that through.
Right, that's just amazing. Genius. Yeah, and to say, well, how am I going to get a blue boar? Well, let me make the sign faded, from black boar to blue. He's just his
and as
creative.
You're reading that, you're thinking that's pretty,
absolutely
amazing.
Absolutely. So when Joe Diedrich is coming back from being robbed of the whiskey, he stops in the tavern there and talks to the tavern operator, the bartender there, the man named Jonas Blue. Well, Jonas Blue in real life his name was Jacob Long. Well, he's sitting there and not to give too much information out of the book, but a lot of the outlaw activities, Jonas Blue, Jake Long, knows about a lot of the outlaw activities because the outlaw band kind of comes to the tavern a lot and relies on him to keep their secrets. And if somebody's coming through town and stops at that tavern that has money, they want to know about it. So the outlaw band has kind of developed a reputation with the tavern operator. But when Joe Tetrick is coming back through and he stops at that tavern and is talking to Jonas Blue, so you've got the characters, Joe Diedrich and Jonas Blue, talking to each other, sitting there, and I think it's chapter 5 of the book. The whole chapter talks about that. Well, in real life, that's Joe Tetrick and Jacob Long talking to each other, which are two ancestors of mine.
Oh, my
So that's
goodness.
pretty cool to me.
That's neat.
To have my two of my great grandfathers talking to each other right there in that chapter 5 of that book.
Some little tidbits you would have never known otherwise.
Right.
And he really fleshes
cool.
out those characters.
He does. He absolutely does. Yeah.
So the book is a success.
The book is absolutely a success, and it comes down to, 1899, again, didn't have any photos in it. 1907, and then it sold so well, too, that Granville Davidson Hall did another printing in 1913. So just in a less than 15-year period, that book was published 3 different times because so many people were wanting it. But the curiosity of that book, and actually after 1913, the next edition wasn't until 1946. And his widow had published it at that time because Granville Davidson Hall died in 1934. So in 1946, the next edition was published. And I could go off on so many tangents, and actually I have another tangent in my mind. I'm going to get this out of my mind real quick, because the 1946 edition, since I mentioned that, if anybody has a 1946 edition, chances are the first few pages, they have the signature E.E. Meredith and another signature Nettie B. Cooper.
Why
because the inside of, it's like the first, maybe second or third page maybe, of the book has a sketch of the Big Elm tree, and it shows Lorraine Esmond out of the book. It shows her sitting underneath the Big Elm tree. It's a pen and ink sketch that was copied into the book for the 1946 edition. Nettie Bartlett Cooper is the one that drew that. However, whenever they went to publish the book, they left her name out of it. They didn't give her credit for it. They put the sketch there, but they didn't put anywhere that was credited to her. And then in the next few pages, there's like a little preface there that talks about well, it's different things, but it talks about the Big Elm Award, getting awarded a prize and the history of concerning a 4th edition and stuff like that. But that little tidbit was written by E.E. Meredith, which was a Marion County historian, and they didn't give him credit either. So when those books were published, before they were sold, before they were put up for sale, E.E. Meredith and Nettie Bartlett Cooper sat down and autographed every page of those books that, like where her sketch appeared, she autographed that. Every book has her signature.
Does that make that edition more valuable in any way?
I don't think it does, but it makes it more interesting.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people may not realize, or I'm sure most people don't realize why those signatures are in there. But it would be very rare to find a 1946 edition that doesn't have those 2 signatures in it, because they sat down before they were sold, and it's like, okay, let's get our pens ready because we got to go through, however many hundreds of books there were.
Well, rightfully so. They
Absolutely.
needed credit for
Absolutely.
that.
I completely agree.
I'm surprised they didn't do a movie about this book.
You want to do one? Let's do one.
I would love to do one. We could do it on YouTube.
I want to play one of the characters, though, that were my ancestors.
Yeah.
But so 1899, 1907, 1913, and the book was exhausted after that point. But it's interesting to point out that 1899, the tree was living. By the 1907 edition, the tree was dead.
Oh my.
Yeah.
What happened to it?
So there are a lot of theories that have come out, and I say a lot, there's 3 top theories that have come out as to why the tree died. One is being an elm disease that came through and killed all elm trees in like the 1904-1905 period. Whether that's true or not, nobody will ever know the true reasons. Another one I have heard, and if this photo goes in with the title of the podcast, then people might be able to see it, but another one that I've heard is that the Hood family kept hogs pinned at the tree's base. The hog pen, the tree was inside of the hog pen, and the hogs scraped the bark off the bottom of the tree, and that helped cause it to die.
Like rooting around it.
And you can see in the picture that absolutely the bark is gone off of the bottom of the tree.
Yeah.
So that could have had something to do with it. Again, the elm disease could have had something to do with it. And then the third theory, which has some truth to it, is that the streetcar line was coming through, and streetcar line opened in 1906, I believe. September 1st, 1906 is the first run through Shinnston. So you figure the spring, summer of 1906, they were putting the running the streetcar lines through the Big Elm area. And whenever they were doing it, where the streetcar was going to run, the power company at the time, which I don't think it was named Monongahela Power, because the power company had switched names, switched companies, and everybody's getting bought out by somebody else. At one time it was called the Clarksburg and Fairmont Traction Company. I mean, there were so many different names that traction company went through at the time whenever they're putting that streetcar line in. But that they were coming through, and the branches that overhung where the streetcar was going to come through, they didn't feel it safe, so they trimmed the tree where it was going to affect any form of the streetcar being affected. And they had permission to trim the tree from the Hood family. But supposedly they trimmed too much of it back, and that caused the tree to start dying. And that story has to have some validity.
Yeah.
Because in my personal research accounts that I've found on doing research at WVU in the downtown library, which has an excellent West Virginia room if nobody's ever been there. The West Virginia room has a lot of interesting stuff, but the downtown library has newspapers on microfilm and all kind of old books that you can look through and old research documents. I have found the court cases for where the Hood family sued the traction company. Well, what are you going to sue the traction company if your hogs have killed the tree? You're going to sue the traction company because there's something to do with the traction company killing your tree. And they won. They didn't win all of what they sought, but they won part of the case. So a judge somewhere awarded them money from the traction company for killing the tree. So there has to be some validity to that, but I would probably say it's a little bit of all three.
I think so too, Bobby.
Elm
it was just so much
disease,
damage
yeah, right.
to that tree.
You're talking a 600-year-old tree and
just like an old person.
Massive growth of it, and then really something that is that large and that where so many interested persons get curious about it. I mean, why would you pin hogs underneath of it anyway?
Yeah, that's just...
And really, I mean, even if, why would you want hogs underneath of something that a branch could fall off and kill them? I mean, there's all kind of reasons you could think of. But I think the Hood family was partially to blame for the care that the tree got in its later years, or the lack of care that the tree got in its later years. But, regardless, the tree was dead by the second printing in 1907, and they didn't want to get rid of the tree because it was still an attraction. It was still a massive skeleton, if you will, in their yard or in their farmland, on their property, it was an attraction. The book brought it fame. The book brought the whole property fame. So they left it standing. They cut the biggest branches off and left the main skeleton of the tree standing for several years. And then I found an old newspaper article from May of 1917. And in May of 1917, the new road was coming through. And when the new road was coming through, meaning that they were putting the paved road there in front of what we travel on today. Once they were doing that, the tree was in the way, and it was a dead tree, and it had been dead for over 10 years at that point. So it was only going to keep deteriorating, so they cut the tree down at that point. And the Hood family, probably a lot of people, but the Hood family kept blocks and salt. Even I've seen a jar of sawdust from the Big Elm tree. They kept as much as they could because they knew that people would always still be interested in it. And whether they sold it to people or just gave it to people, I was told they passed out to interested passersby, is how it was quoted to me, of saying that they got rid of the blocks and things of the tree. And I have actually a very large piece of the tree that was given to me several years ago, but that came off of the Big Elm tree. My cousin has a jar of sawdust from the tree, and I've seen all kind of, there's canes made from the tree.
Yeah, isn't there a cane down at the Shinnston History Museum?
Bice Ferguson Memorial Museum in Shinnston has a walking stick made from it. And I don't know what happened to it, but I believe there is something in the Amy Goff Vance house, or if it's still in the Amy Goff Vance house, I don't know. But there used to be something in there in a case made of the Big Elm tree. But there've been a lot of things over the years that people have carved or whittled or done whatever to.
And I've seen your postcards too, like they took of it going through town on the wagon.
Right,
I think
on the
it
wagon,
was.
Yeah.
I bet people were sad.
Sure,
the old timers.
And it brought a finality kind of to the locals having that popularity, because they probably for a long time thought, well, this book, people are always going to want to come and see this. They'll want to come and learn about our area, but then the tree was gone. So it kind of took away a little bit. It kept the interest, but it still took away. And proof that it took away, because in the first 15 years, the book was published 3 times. And then, from 1913 till 33 years later, it wasn't published again. So I'm sure because of the tree leaving, you had that long time span where a book wasn't published anymore, and it wasn't as popular because the evidence wasn't there anymore.
Is that farm still in the family, or?
No, the farm's kind of interesting because, and I could go off on so many different tangents here, but as I said earlier, Samuel Merrifield settled the land in the 1770s. He sold it to the Everson family. The Everson family lived there until 1868. In 1868, William Hood bought it. Well, up until the time that William Hood bought it in 1868, that it had just been a farm. Like, William Hood bought it to have a show place. He wanted his farm to be a show place. Like, he's the one that turned it into, he built this very nice brick home, where before the Everson family had lived in the old log home that was on the. And real quick, there are a lot of myths about the Big Elm farm and the Big Elm tree. I don't know how these things even get started, but one time somebody told me, well, that old log house on the Big Elm farm, they took logs from the tree and made that house. I looked at them. They had to know that I was looking at them with, are you stupid? Thought in my process, because for one, okay, you cut logs off of the tree. What's left of the tree? You don't have anything left of the tree. So why would the tree still be there if you're going to cut it to use? That made no sense. So, and I've heard different things over the years. But anyway, I kind of went off on that tangent. But the William Hood, whenever he bought the farm in 1868, he built there used to be a 2-story, very nice brick home up a brick driveway that stopped there. And he wanted again, he wanted a showplace. He wanted the cheese factory. He brought cheesemakers in from Switzerland and had a nice cheese factory, a nice dairy farm. He had, actually, I have a picture of the farm, and he had a brick outhouse.
That's unusual.
Yes. So
did the brick all come off the farm? Did he make his own brick?
If he did, I don't know that. Down the road further, the Harrison family made bricks whenever they built their brick house. They made bricks on their farm. I'm not sure about the Hoods if they did. It wouldn't surprise me to know that, but I would say, he had the money. I'm sure it came from, it was a very nice brick plant somewhere that brought it in.
I bet that was beautiful.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But so William Hood did that in 1868. Well, as he got older and the farm became more and more to take care of, he had several children, but as he got older, he sold the farm to his two of his sons, Harry Hood and Charles Hood. So, and actually I've seen the deed whenever he sold it to them, and in the deed, it specified that whenever he was selling it to them, they also had to build him a new residence just south of the farm a little bit. And he specified in the deed the type of residence that he wanted. So,
wow.
And so, you figure he's going to do that. If he's going to buy a old dilapidated farm in 1868 to make it a showplace, this is the type of man that is going to pick and choose what he wants in life. So, and that was to his sons. But so at that point, whenever William Hood sold it to Charles, his sons Charles and Harry, Harry never married, didn't have any children, and Charles married and had one daughter. So that one daughter was named Hannah Hood, and Hannah Hood inherited everything from both Harry and Charles, so she inherited the farm. So one old woman inherited all of this farmland, and she died, I believe she died in 1976. So in 1976, her estate was kind of how you would expect one elderly woman to have that much, not necessarily complete wealth, though she was a well-to-do woman, but that much farmland and things to have to go through. Her estate it took several years to be settled, but part of what she wanted was to use the brick home place, the brick home that her grandfather William Hood had built in 1868, as a rest home. And the Hood family rest home was, I think, what it was to be named, and the Baptist church in Shinnston, the First Baptist Church in Shinnston, to basically own it and operate it, is my understanding. And I don't know the details of what all transpired or what happened or whatever, but that just was not a reasonable request for a church to manage a rest home at the time, so they declined that. The house was torn down. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have seen in the house. I heard the staircase was awesome in the house. I would have loved to have seen it, but the house was torn down, and then the Baptist church, among many other different people, had benefited from her estate. But the house itself just wasn't preserved in the sense that she wanted it to be. But it's like a twofold. You shouldn't be able to specify what you want done to your things when you're leaving them to somebody else, but you should also try to leave things to somebody that you know it's going to be preserved.
Yeah.
So it's like a twofold.
Yeah.
And it's a shame the house was torn down. The property itself got sold to, I think it was the Cunningham Brothers with Tentacle Company, and they worked the land for several years, strip mined some sections of it and stuff. The Big Elm grade school, where it's Big Elm, I keep calling it the grade school. It's actually titled the Big Elm Elementary School, but where it sits now was part of the farm, and it got sold to them. And then it was in the Tentacle Company had it until, I think it was last summer, 2024, July maybe. They had an auction and sectioned off all of the land, sold it in sections. And
that's what usually happens, isn't it, Bobby?
Yeah, and they had it for, 40, 45 years. They had it and used it, and I'm sure it just got to the retirement ages, and they needed to get rid of it. So it is sectioned off now, and it's my understanding one company bought a large portion of it. So I don't know what will become of the future, but for right now, it's neat to be able to look at the land and see, well, this used to sit there, this used to sit there, look through everything and see it. But there is a cemetery on the property too. Actually, the character in the book, the Lorraine Esmond, the very first character mentioned where she's sitting underneath the elm tree, she's buried on the farm on that graveyard, and several other people are too that are mentioned there. But
is that a family plot, or was there a church cemetery there? Or?
It's actually two cemeteries. there was no church there. No, it was just a family grave plot. But there's actually two there. One, I believe it's just called the Hood Family Cemetery, and the other one is the Big Elm Cemetery. But
Can you go visit
they're
them?
reasonably close to each other. And my cousin in South Carolina actually, and to backtrack real quick, when I was talking about Joe Tetrick in the book, so Joe Tetrick is buried in that cemetery and his wife.
Okay.
So because of him being buried in that cemetery and that family connection, one of his descendants, my cousin in South Carolina, purchased the cemetery whenever they were selling it off in lots.
Oh, great.
He bid on the cemetery
so
property and bought
it.
it. So yeah, so it's in the family. So that's nice to be able to, make sure that, which, there's in today's world, there's certain laws that you can't just disrupt a graveyard or cemetery, but at least it isn't in some kind of hands of somebody that won't appreciate it. My cousin's going to appreciate it and take care of it. So
well, that's special.
Yeah, definitely.
So through the book and photographs that we still have and your research on it, we can still kind of remember the Big Elm, huh?
Yeah, and I mean, for years, people were trying to. Actually, the fame that brought the community, the fame that came with the book when it first came out in 1899, it's kind of funny because you can compare it to today's world with the same concept. Because, after the book came out, there ended up being a restaurant in Shinnston called the Great Elm Restaurant. So it's like, everybody's going to try to profit off of the name because you got these people that are coming by train into town because it's like, I'm going to go to this place in West Virginia and figure out, who these people are and what this book is about and, do some locating here. So they had a restaurant called the Great Elm Restaurant, and locally there was a cigar that came out, and it was a really fat cigar, and they called it the Big Elm cigar. So I mean, they're gonna try to profit wherever they can. But also, my great grandfather was a member of the Big Elm Lodge of the Knights of Pythias, and the lodge had its meetings in the old coal company store building, third floor of the coal company store building in Enterprise. So it was actually not necessarily an Enterprise lodge, but I mean, it was actually a lodge for a large locality south of Shinnston, or north of Shinnston, but they titled it the Big Elm Lodge of the Knights of Pythias. So, I mean, they were trying to capitalize on that Big Elm interest, I guess. And then my great-grandmother was a member of the Big Elm Quilting Club. And it had nothing to do with Big Elm either. It was just a group of women in the Shinnston area that they met at, this week we're going to meet at this woman's house, this week we're going to meet at this woman's house. And, they would meet. My parents have a quilt that was made from the Big Elm Quilting Club, and the women would actually come into what's my parents' house, and that was my great-grandparents' house. People would set up quilting frames, and they would sit and quilt for the day, and that was their quilting club. But they called it the Big Elm Quilting Club. But they were just trying to, something else to capitalize on that name.
Well, it's kind of keeping it alive.
Yeah,
isn't it?
right, absolutely. Because, just like the book bringing it fame for so many years, and then the tree dies, and then, the tree's a skeleton, and then the tree's gone. So, I mean, you're in steps, and you're like, well, let's try to live it somehow. And, even today, and for years, I don't know when it was first developed into the Elm Roadside Park, but the Elm Roadside Park was there for several years, and it's been gone all of my lifetime. But then, 1990, 1991, 1992, Big Elm Elementary School becomes a thing. So, I mean, you're still, even though they named it Big Elm Elementary School because it's in the community of Big Elm, it still leaves that interest, I guess.
And kind of a connection
back
to that.
It definitely connects it. And even though the connection might not come to a full circle, because you've got, just like that woman that brought her grandson into the log house I mentioned earlier, she thought that it was Big Elm because of the elm trees in the front of the school. Well, no, it's Big Elm for a whole different reason, and it's a big reason.
and isn't that kind of a West Virginia thing? Like, I'm just thinking like Chicken Inn Hill outside of Quiet Dale. I've known it as Chicken Inn Hill all my life, but I never knew why it was Chicken Inn Hill. There was actually a place there, a restaurant called Chicken Inn.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's kind of keeping that connection of local things, in the area and everything.
Absolutely.
But gosh, Bobby, I've enjoyed talking to you. I think
I've
there are
enjoyed
times
it,
about you're going to have to come back and
I'm
tell
sorry
us.
I've talked so long.
No, I love it. I love this.
But
I wish we could go for more hours.
There are so many different ways that you could take it. So many different topics to discuss about, even just not just that area, but the Big Elm itself and the book itself, and going into detail about the different chapters of the book. There's so many different branches you could go off and say, well, let's talk about this, and you could spend forever talking about that. But again, when it comes down to it, the tree was massive. The tree was interesting. The tree was made famous because of the book Daughter of the Elm, and the Daughter of the Elm, whether it was for good or bad, it created more people interested. It got more people interested in it because of the fact that they were arguing. Is it true or not? We're going to find out. Well, I'm going to say that's not true. Well, it is true. I'm telling you right now it's true. And a man in enterprise, his name was James V. Morris. I always say, because there's lots of James Morrises, but James V. Morris Victor was his middle name. But he told me one time, and this makes the most sense, he said, the only people that argue and say that the Daughter of the Elm was fiction are the people who descend from the bad guys. And he's really right, because the people that have always said, well, there's not a word to that's true, are the family of the people that were the outlaws in there.
And every family's going to have
absolutely.
that.
I've got them. Everybody's got them.
I do too, yes.
But regardless of whether they were good or bad depicted in the book, take hold of the credit where it's given. You're credited with fame for a reason. Just grab a hold of the fame.
I think that makes it kind of interesting, though, when you find the bad boys in your family tree.
Nobody would have cared who Al Capone was unless he did something bad.
That's right. That's right. But gosh, thank you. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
And we'll have to bring you back on another subject. And there's so much history down in Shinnston area, too.
There is, yeah.
But I encourage people to get the book and read it. It's
absolutely,
very interesting book. Still holds up well today. But thank you for coming by the History Museum. And I'm going to close out by saying, make every day count, because you are making history today. Thank you, Bobby Bice.
In the silence of your wildwood, to the rhythm played by every mountain stream, it becomes a lullaby every time that I come home to West Virginia in my dreams. West Virginia mountain melodies, there's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free, your West Virginia mountain melodies. I feel secure in the arms of your green valley. There's a peace you've given me that's yours alone. Take me in like a child to the gentle of your wild West Virginia. I'm coming home. Your West Virginia mountain melodies, there's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free, your West Virginia mountain melodies. West Virginia mountain melody, there's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free, your West Virginia mountain melody.